Even in an AI-focused world, MacroEdge is in the business of focusing on you. We don't just understand our clients, we listen to what's said and illuminate on what's not. In a world moving at the speed of light, with shifting markets, evolving workforces, and non-stop disruption, MacroEdge helps you to navigate and identify novel opportunities, expand your enterprise, and succeed in tomorrow's world. And it all starts with you. Put your enterprise and your perspective in the driver's seat. We're in the business of you.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to MacroEdge Radio number 76. This is John Galt speaking. I did survive last night. Don't ask me how. In one of the most bizarre speeches a world leader has ever given. And I will have you know that I am not blaming the Chinese for any technical faults or flaws in this broadcast tonight. They will all be self-inflicted because, geez, don't play the drinking game when Trump is speaking. That being stated, here we are tonight with a very special guest. He'll be joining me here in just a second. I'll give a quick market review. It sucked today. It was a bad week, but it's been a low volume move up and a low volume move down. So we actually do not have any kind of real picture or committed direction. We still have earnings coming out. But today was different as the distribution started to accelerate past the high tech stocks and into the financials. We'll see how that goes as regional banks start to report. And anybody who's crazy enough to invest in anything that flies up into outer space or retail probably deserves what's coming to them. That being stated, without any further ado, I just lost him as a speaker. Ulysses Awsumb, who's been a guest several times on here, as seen on Fox Business Network, and also noted for his wit, commentary, and writings and contributions to MacroEdge. I have to tell you, if you don't follow his wisdom, you're missing out. This guy really knows his stuff when it comes to the real estate and construction industry. And I bring this up because of a story. You never know what's going to catch on and become a massive hook or get a lot of views. I mean, I posted a story sometime in March and I got 3 million views. Now, I didn't even realize it until way after the fact. We're trying to sit here and get Ulysses Awsumb now. It's sort of strange how this thing is not connecting again. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me, John?
Now I can hear you. Now he's on board. For some reason, this board is not showing you as a speaker because, well, it's X.
That makes sense, right?
Yes, perfectly logical. The lowest and best quality control that you can find west of Bangladesh. And I'll leave it at that. So what we saw yesterday was a story that short sales are making a comeback, and that story actually made it to the national news through the New York Post via Realtor.com, of all things. And the fact that most people are like, what's a short sale? Except for us older individuals who went through the last crash in 06 through 09. It's amazing that we've gone full circle, along with a malinvestment in commercial real estate, residential real estate, et cetera. So let's get your view from 35,000 feet. Tell us, what have you seen since the last time we've talked that people should start paying more attention to, wherever you want to go, residential or commercial?
Yeah, well, I'll touch on residential since you brought it up. For those of you that don't know, most of my contributions in research and analysis for MacroEdge is in the single family construction and the commercial world. So existing residential is not something that I cover in great depth. I comment on it here and there because I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings about the real estate market at large. But I do find it interesting also that we are hearing about foreclosures or short sales at all. A couple of years ago, that was almost unheard of, and to say that we would see them was certainly met with some animosity here on this platform for sure. So that's kind of fascinating that we're actually seeing that happen again. And while we're not seeing, complete national home prices go backwards on the existing side, what we do have is we've got 4 straight years of new builders having to have price impairments. I'm going to share a chart here momentarily, but just to let everybody know, over the last 4 years, builders have been facing an uphill battle in the cost of construction. They've not been able to pass those costs on. In fact, they've had to increase the cost to buy down rates to continue to move product. Over this last 3 quarters, we've seen that actually impact them greatly, and we're starting to get some people notice in the mainstream media as well that the builders are not doing as well as people previously thought they were. In fact, most of the builders have seen at least a 50% contraction in their share price. They have seen up to 25% decline in their median or average sale price, depending on how you measure it, in 4 years. And I don't see any sign of that stopping. So it's a rough market for builders right now. I'm going to post this chart and let you jump in.
Please do, because I want to sit here and talk about that, because let's start with the builders who have been carrying the everything is awesome meme to new extremes. And I don't mean to say that just to be a jerk or jackwagon towards builders. Most builders are fine people. And then you meet the corporations that are builders and the subs that they hire, and you go, oh my God, how the hell are we going to survive? When you think about that, it does bring to mind the arms, the false hope. I call it false hope financing. You're tricking someone into saying, for the next 5 years, your rate's going to be 3%. And so it might jump up to 6.7%, but that's still a great rate relative to what your parents paid in 1982 at 17%. And when you listen to the selling points on it, it's almost at the level of a used car salesman. What they don't seem to understand is that reset to 6.7% was contingent on the Federal Reserve and the interest rate environment remaining friendly to the industry. I would say at this point in time, we're anywhere but friendly to the real estate industry and becoming extremely unfriendly, not just because of tariffs and cost buildup, but to the builders who have managed to sit there and build the wrong types of homes in the wrong markets for so long that now they're stuck with McMansions coast to coast, sea to shining sea.
Yeah, well, I mean, their entire business is selling, right? So I can't really fault them for that or say that that's shocking in any way to me. I get a lot of the dislike over some of the behaviors, especially when you have the National Association of Builders writing a letter to Jerome Powell asking him to cut rates. And then, of course, when rates did get cut, uh, bond prices actually went up. And so that was not helpful actually to builders. And here we are many months later after that, and we continue to have what in short term memory is higher rates. But the problem with it isn't so much that average rates are high or just prices are high, it's the combination of the two and what builders have to be able to construct a home at. Uh, so, to your point, there were a lot of communities um, that have a lot of inventory for these builders. When they, in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of interest, mortgage rates were really cheap. Part of the problem that builders face is one of their own doing, and it was attempting to build to meet that demand. But basically, the way these large builders operate is like running the Titanic or a giant ship, right? You don't stop on a dime. You can't just stop construction on 15,000 homes a quarter, 5,000 homes a quarter. It's not how that works. So if you're in the process of construction, you're in the process of developing land, to stop that would be something that would be a serious problem, like we saw in the GFC, like we saw uh, in some parts of the country at the tail end of the 80s into 1990 and into the early 80s. So builders went to meet this demand. They compiled a lot of lots, acquired a lot of lots. Most builders actually measure their lot count in years, not in month supply like we get the numbers published. And the reason being, let's take Lennar for an example. If Lennar sells 80,000 homes in a year, they need to have a lot of land in order to meet demand. And planning one of these projects or developments is not something that is just also, stop, turn on a dime. It takes months to build development plans, months to get submitted, months to be approved, and then months for that land to be developed and to finish lots where then they can open a community and start selling homes. So now what we've got is they're sitting on the second most amount of inventory that they have in recorded history. We've got prices going negative for them. In fact, the chart that I just posted shows the comparison of Lennar's average sale price as published from their earnings every quarter going back to 2015. But it's also compared with the price of the conventionally financed new home as published by the Survey of Construction from the Census Bureau. Now, I use that because that is 70% of what acquisitions are for builders is conventionally financed. The two track very closely, and essentially, Lennar's faced a 9-year price impairment. Their average sale price is matching what it was in quarter 2 of 2017, which I think in any other industry would be alarming to some folks that 9 years worth of pricing has been wiped out. And if you look at the Survey of Construction, the conventionally financed sale price is also back to what it was 9 years ago, almost 9 years ago. And it's on its way following Lennar's price down. So current situation, like I said, for builders is really challenging. They're going to have to keep moving inventory. You might see more builders face what Beazer Homes is facing right now, where they've actually been losing money for several quarters. They're actively looking for buyers. We just had Taylor Morrison be acquired by Berkshire Hathaway, and it was not as, I say, rosy as acquisition as everybody had made it out to be once you started looking under the hood. But I think we should be on the lookout for a lot more of that this year, especially going into the fourth quarter. There's a lot of builders. I'd say the publicly traded ones that are somewhere between 15th and 25th largest are probably prime candidates for these price impairments becoming a problem for them in their holding costs.
Well, this brings me to that chart you just posted. I'm going to ask you a question because what are the primary driving engines that we've seen behind the residential boomlet that we saw post 2020 was private equity and private credit jumping into the fray to try and get a piece of the pie. The much ballyhooed, oh my God, the banks are buying subdivisions to rent out and hedge funds and investment funds, et cetera. When you start breaking that down and realizing it almost looks as if private equity is competing with the builders in some markets, and in other markets, they're working hand in hand to create communities. But now that the communities aren't selling out or are no longer profitable on a rent-based basis, uh, there's a lot of problems coming for both the investing side of this and the actual manufacturers of these homes and subdivisions. The empty lots are one thing. You can't replicate the land, but you build a $500,000 home and it's worth $390,000 in reality in this market with a potential for another 10 or 20% drop. There are some rather large builders like Taylor Morrison that are going to be in trouble. And Taylor Morrison, for the record, I don't hate the people that work there, but the quality of their stuff has deteriorated severely in the last decade. Just an honest opinion from a person who lives on making opinions. Take it away, sir.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of anger out there right now towards builders. And while I won't defend all of them, I also won't join in the criticizing them. I do think that there's probably a lot of issues that came to light recently. Having been in the world, I can tell you that what it was like to build in 2021 and 2022 for publicly traded home builders, and with them, it was one of the most insane things that I have ever experienced in my 20 plus year career. Uh, just so everybody's aware, from 2021 into 2022, we built more housing units than any other time in recorded history. More than leading up to the 1974 recession, which we had rapid expansion of the population. more than we built at any point during the 1980s or 1990s, and more than we built leading up to the GFC. So just to put that into perspective, that's the level of volume of housing that began construction in 2021 and 2022 that we had, actively under construction. We have declined since then, and it's been a fair amount, but we're still basically building nearly more homes than we have ever built before, except outside of recent history and the mid 70s. So while things have declined, the volume is still there. And that's part of why these builders are doing whatever they can to buy down rates. And to your point, it's not a very good thing for a builder to have a $500,000 price point from one quarter, and then in that same community have a $100,000 price cut. That's going to be something that if they have ongoing construction, they're still dealing with the people that have just bought those homes. So you're going to have unhappy residents in that subdivision. You're going to have, everything that comes along with having to cut the price $100,000. So yeah, there is going to be more. Unless something changes, there's going to be more difficulties ahead for builders, even the big ones. D.R. Horton is going to be releasing their earnings on Monday morning. And I expect that they're going to be right there with Lennar, who released theirs earlier this year. Lennar had a nearly 50% reduction in net income. KB Homes published their earnings just a couple of weeks ago. They had a 75% reduction in net earnings. And that was on a 25% decrease in sales. So if that gives you the level of what the actual volume of sales can do to the bottom line. You don't want to have a 25% drop in sales from here on throughout the rest of the year, especially when that's for a spring market. And the spring market is traditionally the best time for builders. So, you're going to get a little bit of a bounce into August, September, because you've got a lot of folks that are going to close before, school year. That's been a traditional driver of strength for sales. But come fourth quarter, I would expect that we're going to see probably in the 40 to 48,000 sales per month, which is going to be on par with some of the worst months over the last 5 years in sales, if we don't see any serious movement in the cost of money, in rates, or pricing.
That being stated, the real cost to build a home has not declined. So margins have been on a squeeze now for, we'll call it 3 years.
I'm gonna challenge that
Insurance and
actually.
really?
So the actual cost to construct the home, right? So we're talking about a few components. Now, if you're talking about the cost for the land to improve the lot and to actually physically build a home, the costs have declined over the last 4 years. And the largest builders have the ability to push those costs down because they're going to take their business to whoever is supplying them with the ability to cut price. Because if their pricing is going down out the door, remember, they've got to make that up somewhere. So part of that is they're going to buy materials. If they can get a 3 to 5% price reduction on materials every quarter, every 2 quarters, they're going to do it. Part of that is on the subcontractors that they have building it. And I will publish a chart, but I actually have a chart showing the build costs of Lennar over the last 5 years, and the actual construction portion has gone down, even though it skyrocketed in 2022 when we saw a massive wave of inflation. It was no different for home building, but they've actually brought those costs down. Where the costs haven't gone down and have actually outpaced that has been in the cost of buying down rates, because you're talking about buying down rates, 200, 250 basis points, or, from 6% down to 4% or down to 3.5%. And that kind of buy down, even in a forward commitment, even in bulk, is very expensive. And then add on to that the incentives that they're adding to get these out the door. And so while construction costs have actually declined, the overall cost to sell a house have increased.
Well, I was looking at it from the tariff impacts to start, because tariffs and transportation are still an issue, although the massive tariffs have been invalidated by the Supreme Court. It seems to me that the shift was to a lower quality or grade of goods by the subcontractors to complete the homes. And that goes part and parcel. Now, personal experience only. So, granted, I have a visual bias. The quality of the builds is far below the standards of '06, '07. And that was the crappiest year for building, if everybody remembers Chinese drywall in Florida, that I've seen in my lifetime. So you have to start asking questions. Are we cutting corners to achieve these cost savings and enable the buy downs?
So to your point, when prices started going insane, yeah, everybody was looking for alternative materials. And part of that wasn't just because of the price. Part of that was because there were certain materials that you couldn't get, and no manufacturer could give you an actual lead time that they could promise to deliver by. And so there were lots of shifts and changes. A lot of builders went from products like wood composite sheathing on the outside of a home to engineered foam products. There are products like uh, zip sheeting. There's a few other ones. Some of the ones that you see in colder climates would be a little bit sturdier than what you'd see in southern climates. Uh, I know I've heard a lot of people call it cardboard, but there's another product that went on a lot of southern homes because you don't have to have the insulative value that things like the zip sheeting would add to. But and while they're engineered to meet codes and standards, it's definitely something that was a noticeable difference. And then coupled with the sheer volume, uh, most of these builders don't have actual employees constructing the home. They'll employ construction managers, and they're completely built by subcontractors. So if you've got one construction manager that's attempting to build two communities, and in some places 200 houses at a time, that is really challenging for one human being to manage the quality control on that. I mean, it's nearly impossible to be perfect at it. We'll put it that way.
I think you summed up my concerns directly, because eh, the inability to find homes consistently built is a major issue in Florida, especially with the Dade County code for being hurricane proofed, et cetera. But when you walk up to a window and put a level on it and it's not level, or a door, or many other facets of the home, and you see them in the videos on X and on YouTube and TikTok and God knows where else, you got to start asking yourself questions as to how many corners are being cut to achieve that lower cost threshold to enable buy downs and arms rates, arms to support first time home buyers. And again, I go back to it, and this is something you and I have talked about. It doesn't seem that we've learned a lesson to build homes that fit the first time home buyer. A 25-year-old couple with maybe one child doesn't need a 3-2 2,600 square foot home. On the flip side, a 2-2 1,800 to 2,000 square foot home that's under $180,000 would go flying off the shelves. People would buy them left and right. I don't understand this refusal to build to need versus refusal to build for profit. You can do both.
I believe you can, but I also think that that is something where, and I know this is, it's actually one of my least favorite things to talk about, location. But I genuinely do think that's location based. Um, I have seen it work in some markets. Talking about, let's say, like the post-war home, right? In the majority of urban uh, areas in the United States, what you saw built in the late 40s, early 50s, even on into the early 60s, smaller homes, just under 1,000 square feet, uh, you're right. They'd be a lot more affordable. The problem with those is that when builders have constructed them in new suburban, exurban developments, they're not getting interest, and people actually aren't buying them. What people are finding, or what builders are finding, is that if they had a 12 to 1300 square foot footprint, ranch style, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, that is moving for the most part if it's in the right price point. Um, too many upgrades, too many options is not. But I would think it'd be a no-brainer, especially with the way the public talks about wanting prices to be more affordable. But I think we're at a point where I don't know that people, the general public, are interested in smaller houses to the degree that um, we were in the past. And the other thing about that, you got to remember, prior to the 1960s, a lot of those houses weren't built by builders per se. They were built by somebody's grandpa and uncle and cousin, and they might have copied a plan from the neighbor, might have copied a plan from a builder, but there were a lot more people building their own houses at that time. And so that was part of what made them even more affordable, not just the price and the interest rates or how long people mortgage things for.
So I'm going to ask the hard question that the National Association of Realtors, which does not like me, I don't know why, probably because I'm still ranting about '06 and '07, and the fear of someone who is a realtor. There seems to be an evolving consensus, and I was one of those who adopted that at a much younger age, and I'm a lot older than most of you cats out there, that we are becoming a renter society. If you're under 30 years of age and you're in an upwardly mobile part of your career where you're required to move frequently for higher income and promotions and to survive in the corporate world, it is a fool's errand to buy a home at that point in time for most people. But now it seems to have hit a price point because of the high cost of a new home, especially the insurance maintenance and some of these absolutely asinine HOA fees and community fees. And there's all kind of hidden fees stacked in there, folks. We could talk about that in another show. It seems that we're becoming more of a renters society by necessity and survival for the employees versus the traditional American model of 2 kids, 2 station wagons, a home, etc. Your take on that?
I would agree with that, but I think there's also been a bit of a psychological mind shift in it as well. I know it's popular on this app to go back and forth about, is it better to rent or is it better to buy? Uh, I'm of the opinion that that's how would I know what's better for anybody? I can help them quantify or qualify that, but I do witness that there's a lot of people that like the mobility of renting, that like the ability to not be responsible for um, maintaining the home, right? I mean, that's the other thing about home ownership. If you, I mean, I would assume for the majority of folks that would own a home, there is a lot of maintenance required and upkeep of a house. And so that's a lot of work. That's a lot of cost that gets factored into actually owning. Now, for some folks, that just goes along with it. That's part of owning a home. And other people look at it like renting is a better option. And who's to say other than those folks that that's right? But I definitely have noticed with the younger crowd, I'd say under 35, um, even probably 35 to 45, I've seen a lot of folks that really love the mobility that renting provides them, and the lack of the cutting the grass, the lack of cleaning gutters, the lack of doing yard work type of thing. So I think it's just a psychological shift in how people view things versus how maybe they did 20 years ago. My take on that.
Love it. Real quick, promote your Substack, sir. Promote what you're doing and what you're focusing on, because I'm going to promote macroedge.net/ozone. That's macroedge.net/ozone. Find more in-depth written insights and research from the team at MacroEdge. Check it out. Worth your time. And please stay tuned. We have a lot of big guests coming up, Ulysses being one of them. We had a great guest last week. I don't know how JG Nuke tolerates me, but he does. We're going to keep moving forward because we have to sit there and dissect the economy and the markets. You can no longer look at macroeconomics as a singular theoretical idea. It's such a broad subject that you have to start incorporating politics, markets, and economic theory and seeing what is evolving from the situation we're in. That's macroedge.net/ozone. Please promote your Substack, Mr. Awsumb.
Thank you. Well, you can occasionally find my work at MacroEdge as well. I do publish 2 indexes that I have created at thememo.net. You can also find me if you're interested in any of my consulting construction work at uspropertyservices.com.
And now we're going to go to my favorite subject and your favorite subject, commercial real estate, that you and I could probably spend 3 hours ranting about. But the first story that hit my mind, that hit my line this week and all of my timeline, was from the Wall Street Journal about how commercial real estate C&I loans are being used to mask some financial shenanigans, possibly, and also to sit there and start building more warehousing after Amazon just dumped a ton of space onto the market. Where are we at now with the commercial real estate market and a potential revival in warehouse construction, which blows my mind after what Amazon did last year?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag all over the place. Retail is still actually doing pretty well as far as new projects go. There's a lot of growth out there in smaller companies that are looking to take on market share in certain segments. So I do see an awful lot of that happening. The Dodge Construction Momentum Index has not been as bad this last quarter as it was first quarter, which was it was rough for builders, commercial builders out there. So from the construction standpoint, it's kind of a mixed bag. From the real estate perspective, I'm seeing a really mixed bag across the board where some of the biggest concerns I've heard from folks are appraisals in refinancing or in new acquisitions of projects. And we do have an awful lot of warehouse space that keeps hitting the market and or opening up. And it seems like all of the commercial brokers, CoStar, are all showing a continued increase in vacancy in industrial. And it kind of goes against that manufacturing is coming back if we're looking at, industrial space, manufacturing space, shipping space. We're growing in vacancy and we're not seeing any real new job growth in manufacturing either. And that is something that is becoming, I think, more and more of a conversation from what I'm hearing, that industrial across the country is starting to not be as solid as everybody once thought it was.
Are we seeing either a false hope or a real anticipation of a surge in economic growth, in your opinion? And I can't really say that specifically, but in certain regions, because this surge that we've seen in the transportation side can be attributed to several things, one of which is the finally enforcing the law about Americans being the drivers and reducing capacity. But with the storage and warehousing,
is it growth? Is that growth, or is it just costs more to ship something? Because there's no new jobs being added, right? I mean, if there's no growth in employment, there's no growth in volume, it just costs more to ship it. That's great for the people that are transporting it, existing operators, but that's not an industry growing.
Well, that's my whole point. We seem to see this anticipation in warehousing, like there's going to be a surge of economic activity, but the truth is it's a capacity reduction. We're about to see a consolidation of the railroads with the Union Pacific merger and Norfolk Southern. When you tie it all together, this looks more like a bigger consolidation for the future. I don't understand the reason to start construction on warehousing when there's literally millions of cubic feet of floor space available nationwide and Amazon's still shedding distribution centers. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
They are, aren't they? And it's an interesting thing. Um, I believe there's always an opportunity somewhere for a replacement, right? So let's say, for instance, you pick a city, it could be commercial, it could be housing. There's going to be some demand for replacement of older units, right? Some houses were built in the 20s, some houses were built in the 1800s. Uh, some of these warehouses were built in the 60s, and so they're aged, and they don't fit all of the modern needs. So there's opportunities. So I want to make that clear to everybody listening that I don't think that there's no opportunity, and there's two sides to every coin. But to your point, I think we're seeing the turning of the tide again psychologically, at least from a lot of developers, where there isn't the mad rush that there was earlier to go and open new anything, right? There's um, other than AI data centers, which we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at from the perspective of maybe you've got 7% vacancy in your market for warehousing, does it make a lot of sense to go out there when the vacancy is increasing and you're not seeing an increase in manufacturing jobs and you're not seeing necessarily a decrease in the cost of money or an increase in the rents of what's out there for open space, that might not be the best time to go, all right, let's go replace 3 to 5% of capacity out there. So those are the things that people have to look at when they're developing it. Uh, what's really needed out there? And I think we're seeing more and more across the board that we need less and less new warehouses, uh, less and less new industrial, and more repurposing, more converting, or retrofitting of older units that are beginning to be more and more vacant.
Well, that brings us to one of my favorite subjects, and yours, and Melody's, and everybody else's. And it's the most hilarious subject that you and I have talked about, the theoretical idea that we can convert empty office space into apartments overnight and the almost collapse of a building in New York City. I don't think people understand the difficulty in reconfiguring an office building to uh, a practical residential uh, construct until they see the regulatory requirements to do so. I just fail to see any profitable way to achieve this unless, of course, the government is footing the bill.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll start out with first of all, it we don't even need to get to the regulatory process. The physical limitations on building structures is very real. So while there are still plenty of older buildings, excuse me, out there that would probably work just fine to convert into uh, housing units, condos, apartments, uh, but maybe they're also, they're cash flowing buildings. So why would you if you're a land, building owner and your building is making money, why would you convert it to something when there isn't a need for you to convert it? And then number two, uh, yeah, you're right. I mean, even if you could physically turn it into housing units, you're talking about, again, just like with home builders, there's planning that goes into it that takes months. There is approval that goes into it to take months. And then there's the actual construction, which is not an overnight thing. So even if you were to pick one building and say, all right, ready, set, go, you've got everything lined up, money's in place, ready to go. You're not talking about in 2 weeks it's going to be done. You're talking about 18 to 30 months that, on a 50 to 70 unit building. And if you're talking about something bigger, or to your point, New York, yeah, you've got structural issues which are coming up, maybe, and maybe some of them aren't. But then you have something else that you're contending with, and this is one of the things that I don't think anybody pays enough attention to. And this isn't just a political thing. This is something that's happening elsewhere. It's just much more prevalent in New York City, but it is both an unintentional and I think maybe an intentional assault on actual property rights, whether that's owned by a landlord or somebody that just owns their home. It's becoming more and more popular, the idea that the city, the county, the state, the government can dictate what can happen to your property or what can happen to your property or what they're going to do to your property if you do X, Y, or Z. So we're seeing a gradual attack on property rights across the country, and New York City has become focal point of that, with some of the talk about what the local administration wants to do to landlords, whether they have vacant buildings, whether they evict somebody, they have the right to evict somebody or not, whether they can verify if somebody has the ability to pay the rent. So now you're introducing another hurdle. So you've got the physical hurdle, you've got the regulatory hurdle, and then you've got is the locality, even if they approve this, is this something that as a building owner, a landowner, somebody with capital at risk, is it really something that you want to take the risk on when you're not positive or there's uncertainty about whether or not your legal rights are even going to be upheld?
So let's go from that dark aspect of what we're dealing with, because we're dealing with it in Florida too, also, believe it or not, when it comes to the data centers. We'll talk about data centers in a minute. Our friend here, if you're not following this guy, and Mr. Austin and I only know him online, FC Nightingale Associates. It's at FC Nightingale. Here's a story. It just popped up in my feed. Louisville, Kentucky aims to combat 40% vacancy rate in downtown office towers with more housing. It doesn't sound like local governments or state governments are learning any lessons from the earlier nightmares in other communities, be it Cincinnati, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, wherever. And we have the same thing down here. We have the most absurd thing, and folks, you won't believe it until you see it. Old Motel 6s, old hotels being converted into timeshare condominiums where the rooms are less than 200 to 400 square feet, and you buy them and they timeshare it out for you and share the profits after they take their management fees off of it. I don't see how people think that commercial real estate is sustainable at this level, especially since we haven't had a true recessionary test since the great financial crisis.
Well, interestingly enough, Kentucky is not the only place, or Louisville, one, facing that level of vacancy, or two, facing the government intervention. Twin Cities here in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minneapolis. St. Paul has a very similar vacancy rate, 38%, in the downtown central business district. And one of the things that the city is proposing is to build 20,000 new houses downtown St. Paul. Mind you, downtown St. Paul has been losing population for a little while now. Add to that jobs have left downtown St. Paul, so there's less need or desire for someone to actually move there and live there. And then we come to the thing that is, in some cases, and this is another part of the assault on property rights. We have things like land trusts that are growing up all over the country, in which case public funds are given to a nonprofit entity, and they will help make housing more affordable for people by selling them the house that sits on the land, but not the land. And New Yorkers will understand this because this is a very old commercial real estate apparatus where if you own a piece of land, you can give somebody a land lease. And this is something that's happened all over the country, but it's common in New York. Somebody will even build a tower on a land lease. Then at a certain point, the land lease ends, needs to get renegotiated, or it goes back to the original holder of those rights. So you've got these nonprofits building up all over the place that are creating land trusts. And now what they're doing is they're creating nonprofit coalitions. And they are inviting people from chambers of commerce, inviting people from the government, and inviting patrons of donors and nonprofits. And they're starting to buy these empty buildings that have gone no bid. And mind you, they have even gone no bid at foreclosure auction. Like, not worth a dollar to people because of deferred maintenance, because nobody sees that there's a current value with the cost that comes with renovating it, bringing it up to code, or like we talked about, converting it as well. So you have nonprofit using government dollars or taxpayer dollars that are beginning to circumvent the natural process of short sales in commercial in some markets, central business districts in particular, and some inner suburban rings, like first, second suburban rings, where the land trusts are coming in and they're buying older houses or buying infill lots and using land trusts. So it's another form of not, whether it's the general public not valuing the actual rights that are real estate, right? Because ultimately, real estate isn't just a piece of land. It's all the rights that go with that piece of land: the surface, the subsurface, the air rights, the mineral rights. Uh, and it just is becoming something that people aren't caring about, aren't focused on, or are wanting someone to solve the problem of what they see as housing problem for them. And so now you're getting more assault through mostly well-intentioned people, but they're doing things that are preventing natural capital allocation from risk takers that would say, I can do a better job with this, I can be more efficient, I can renovate something. So you're adding another layer. It's not just the regulatory, you're adding competition at a subsidized rate. I'm not sure if that entirely answered what you asked, but
That
I
hit
thought it was
that
pertinent based on Louisville.
that actually hit the point, because Louisville is but a small symptom of the nationwide problem. And it's a good average starting point. That rolls us over to the special servicing. Now, I've been holding this article back from all of my readers and from the MacroEdge team because I want to talk to you about this. We have hit a new jump in special servicing rates up to 11.2% in June. Now, while most people are thinking that's no big deal, I'm going to read this one excerpt before I hit some of the highlights on this. We're still dealing with pre-2008 portfolios, boys and girls. I'll read this one sentence. Older CMBS 1.0 loans continue to post striking distress levels. Pre-2008 portfolios carried special servicing rates above 62% in June. Legacy structures and lower property values continue to weigh on performance. That goes back to what you were talking about. People are no longer even bidding on a lot of this crap. They don't want to try and deal with it. They don't want to save it. They want to take their hands off of it. The banks are basically going to let the building fall down and let the local governments deal with it. It doesn't seem like the first crisis was enough, because now the distress is spread into the CMBS 2.0 vintages, as it states in the article. Listen to these stats. While the average is 11.2%, office is at 17.11%, and multifamily at 8.2%. Retail dropped slightly to just below 13% at 12.95%. But now we're starting to see lodging climb up, and we're starting to see the reports of it. This is not indicative of a healthy recovery in the commercial real estate market. Would you not agree?
No, I don't think that we're at recovery yet. I don't think that we're at bottom yet. That's not doom. There's going to be some unfortunate losers, but remember, everybody, there's two sides to every coin. So don't take that as everything's terrible. Much like builders, they're going to have to deal with some things, but at the end of the day, if you're talking about special servicing continuing to grow, And we are seeing greater than 25% vacancy in central business districts. And we're starting to see travel slow down. I think actually you're probably going to see a lot more distress in lodging. Um, I just think that that's a natural part of the cycle as costs go up, as people begin to shift their spending habits, as there is more financial strain on um, cash flows. Lodging is a natural place that goes. So you're going to have the weaker chains, weaker locations. Excuse me. It's no different than say McDonald's closing their underperforming stores. You're going to have some hotel chains that are going to be closing their underperforming locations, or they're going to stop licensing that location. The franchisee is going to have to find another one because there is just not enough demand to satiate how much lodging is out there, in my opinion. Um, and I think that we're just sort of seeing that starting to make headlines. Um, this past May, the folks over at Trep were kind enough to have me out in New York City at Trepwire and Trep Connect. And that was a theme amongst the folks that were in the lodging space, even some of the larger operators that were present, that they are having to make decisions about which places they're going to keep open, which ones they're going to close, which ones they're going to renovate. Because the other thing with the lodging, if you look at a lot of the chains from Holiday Inn, uh, Quality Inn, this is not a negative towards any of them, but there's a lot, again, a lot of hotel stock that needs renovation. And hotels and lodging in general need renovations more often than most other property types do because of the nature of their use. So if you're looking at declining rate of occupancy, increased costs, and you're sitting there having to make the decision, am I going to renovate and upgrade 125 key building that I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get the same rates I was or enough to make the renovations will return? Why are you going to do that? So the natural outcome is in that situation will be um, an alternative to renovating it, an alternative to continuing that investment.
Okay, so we talked about CNI, we talked about warehouse investing, we talked about the problems in the financialization side of it. Let's hit to the really crux of what's coming up. And it's a big subject on MacroEdge. It's a big subject nationally. And since I happen to receive, I'm joking when I say this, folks, a paycheck from President Z directly to sit there and sponsor the anti data center movement, the reality is that there's a problem with data centers that people don't want to talk about. It is a C&I loan, technically. It is a commercial real estate space. I think people are misunderstanding. If a data center fails to develop and complete and meet performance standards within a certain period of time, essentially you have a giant specialized warehouse with very little dual use without a high conversion cost related to it. I'd like to hear your take on where this ends up because a
I'm
lot of
really glad.
shells are being built.
Yeah, I'm really glad you made that comment because if we are talking about data centers, we're talking about a house, we're talking about a piece of land. Like I said before, real estate is essentially what are the rights that you own to a piece of property and its improvements above and below ground to what is in the earth and what is in the sky above it. And we have a real fascinating thing happening with data centers. And that is you have people that have pitched it as real estate. You have people that have pitched it as a utility. But if we just look at it from a strictly textbook definition of real estate and improvements, right? A utility would be something like the telephone poles that used to dot the landscape, or the cell phone tower. It would be something like the gas piping that you'll see even in suburban areas to deliver natural gas to people's homes. It's a utility function that is a direct line to end users that we've deemed necessary for the public benefit. You can heat your home, you can get electricity to your house, you can use a telephone, which we even broke up AT&T, Bell over because of the monopoly of it, because we used to have a different viewpoint of even that in this country. Or you have what you're looking at as a business, right? Because what you have with a data center, if you take apart just the components of it, if you remove all of the machinery that's inside of it, you remove the servers, what do you have? You essentially have a giant warehouse, which is a real estate improvement. The data center portion of it is an operating business, right? It is storing data, it is using those servers for computing power, delivering it to anybody anywhere without a direct line per se. And even the old data centers that we have been building over the years that weren't the modern version of what we're talking about, you couldn't classify it as a public benefit, or B, real estate, because it's a business that's renting real estate space. But we have this argument, and here's why. We have a handful of lessees, handful of operators, right? Businesses that operate these current data centers. Google, Meta, OpenAI, a handful of others, but they're operating a business and they're leasing the facility from developers who own the property that develop the concept, right? They said, hey, we'll put a data center here, you lease it from us, we get cash flow, you get a place to run your business. And it's fascinating because this conversation isn't new, it's been ongoing, but from the conversation that I've had with people in the space, from what I learned from people that are very much in the space at Trep Connect, we're running into even more questions because now you're talking about regulatory issues with financiers, banks, lenders saying, that's great. We have 100 developers and landlords that are going to operate 100 different data centers, and each one of them is a different entity. They're not even related. They're totally separate companies, but all 100 of them have the same 4 tenants. And now you have concentration risk because you might have 100 individual developers, but it's the same 4 tenants. Each one of them has 25 spaces. So a quarter of what you're lending is essentially dependent on the same handful of companies continuing to pay the rent in the property that you lent on. And so that, I think, is part of why there's been a discussion about it being utility. That, I think, is part of why you hear discussions about governments taking a stake, and part of why you're hearing any of the rumblings about that space that are not the it's going to save the world, it's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, because there are real issues with the structure, in my opinion, of how these data centers are being financed, being put together, how they're going to pay the bills. Because if you've got 4 tenants that aren't making money on the product or enough money to continue to pay the rent on all 100 spaces, that's a real risk. Why are you going to continue to put your capital in a position as a lender, as a steward of capital for entities that you are beginning to have concerns about whether they have the ability to pay the bills? And even in the case of somebody like Google or Meta, yeah, they have tons of money, they make a lot of revenue. There's no question they could probably pay the bills. But if Google is making lots of money in 5 divisions and one of them is doing nothing but costing them money, zero profit from it whatsoever, How long before, even if the executives want to keep it, the board says, we are not going to keep it. We don't like losing money.
Okay, so the problem I have with this, and this is my twisted way of thinking. I know I'm too logical for Wall Street. If you're basing the AI theory of data centers on quote unquote future potential earnings or future potential cost benefit, you're saying that we're going to put down thousands and tens of thousands of acres of data centers based on using chips that will already be antiquated by modern standards today versus 2 years when the complex is completed, integrated to create software that may be outperformed by something from China or a third party yet to evolve for 1/10 of the cost, yet the taxpayers are going to end up eating the support of this under the theoretical excuse of it's national security or it's a utility. Is that the natural progress that we might see and progression of how this ends?
I'm certainly going to hear claims of it. My personal opinion of the whole thing is I think everybody that I've ever heard involved in or comment on the space is looking at it different than everything else that I've ever seen become any other technological advancement other than .com, and I'll explain why. Because, right, you go back to the 50s and 60s, IBM, and people were building computers. They were building big computers because at one point computers were bigger than everybody's house. But everybody was building and spending with the idea of make it smaller, make it better, make it more compatible. Everybody had this vision of it eventually will cost less and it will be more efficient. So they invested with that in mind. But they weren't going, this is going to continually get bigger. And so we have to build bigger factories. We have to build bigger machines because the only way computers are going to get better is if we build them even bigger than the buildings that house them now, right? Nobody's going, we need to build 50-story computers. They were going, how do I build it smaller, more efficiently, at less cost? With the railroads, right? You talk about things that have become utilities or limited monopolies. You're talking about people who are investing in putting down steel and wood to transport things across the country. It's a physical component. They were looking at, the idea of steam engines at the time. It was somebody else that came along and they did, hey, I can build a faster train. I can make the train longer. They weren't going, we're going to make this infinitely bigger and infinitely more expensive and infinitely investment. It was the idea that they had a plan to return capital, they had a plan to invest, they had a plan to make things more efficient. When we hit .com, and I remember everything was a website. There was a website for everything, and everybody had this idea that all you needed was a website and you could not fail as a business. And then everybody learned you still actually have to make money. And here we are again today. We're talking about this idea of something that nobody has actually proven there's, in my opinion, genuine demand for, right? I mean, you're getting it in your search features, you're getting in your email clients, but did you ask for it or is it being put there? Is there a demand? How much money? What is the real return that people are even making on this? Because I'm not even seeing that there's legitimate cases that people know how to make money with it. And maybe some people do, but the ones that will probably be the most successful probably won't be the ones that are doing anything about it today. Just like a lot of the providers of internet or internet services, internet things, websites that people didn't expect, right? You had Yahoo, which was enormous, but who was it? Google came through the .com because they just delivered something that everybody could use. It was simple. It was no frills. There wasn't the news. There wasn't anything else. The videos. You'd go there, type something in, and find what you wanted. So even if the real estate all works out, even if the lending all works out, how are these companies actually making money on what they're building? Because I don't hear anybody telling me how they're making money, how they plan to make money. All I hear is they just will. And I get that, right? Even as a small businessman myself, you have to have some optimism in that you're going to make it work. But I'm not also going out to people and asking for their money as to invest without a plan, without a return their capital to them, and just going, trust me, bro, it'll be fine.
Can I get an amen? Because I'm going to go back, and I know you people get tired of hearing my historical analogies, but how many of you are still watching Zenith televisions, listening to RCA radios, using tubes in your radios or televisions? It goes back to the evolution of technology. Someone always has something better, but if they get stale in their thought process of how to initiate a new business, in other words, we have to have 10 warehouses at 25,000, 200,000, 400,000 square feet of data processing power. And the Chinese are looking at them like, are you out of your mind? We got two of them with 200,000 square feet each, and we're powering half our AI engines. Which one's more cost effective? It doesn't take a lot to do math. Math is always going to be the victor. And that brings us to the closeout. I don't want to keep you too long, sir, because I appreciate every moment you've given us, and you've really enlightened us as to where we're at. It seems to me that we're stuck in residential and commercial real estate for the next great thing, but it's very stale and almost to the point that unless you really know what you're getting involved with, uninvestable from a public point of view. I'd like your take on that.
Truly uninvestable exists, but it's not as simple as that, right? We're going to have more markets that have futures that are like St. Louis, that are like Memphis, that are like Pittsburgh, where they're great cities. I love all of them, but their population declines. They're not necessarily uninvestable, but more and more of the city does become uninvestable. And more of the city, doesn't matter what type of real estate you're talking about, is uninteresting to anybody, even for $1. But we're also going to have other areas that are growing, and they're going to do just fine, and even thrive. So I think all investing, all real estate is a matter of looking at it from the right perspective, having the right plan, and going about it from that perspective as an investment, as an opportunity. As far as housing goes, yeah, I think we're probably stuck in is where we are as far as sales. We're in this really low volume pattern, and part of that is it's both the cost of money and the price of housing in general. And unless we see prices come down or the rates come down or suddenly people start making lots more money, then I don't see much changing in the near term future for that. And that might mean the next couple of years that the number of housing units sold continues to decline or stays where it's at this low rate that it's been at, because there is the stifling of demand. And not that people don't want that, it's demand is in the desire and the ability to make the transaction happen.
Well, let us talk about the memo.net one more time, please. Share with all of our listeners because this will be posted at my blog, johngaltfla.com, at macroedge.net, on YouTube, on iTunes, everywhere you want to hear it. Share more about the memo.net for everybody tuned in late.
Yeah. So I have created essentially two indices. One is the U.S. home building situation, and it is a composite of the sales price, the direction of sales price, the direction of mortgage rates, and the number of new housing units sold and the number of housing units available for sale. And so it's a handy number that can show you exactly where things are going, because it is a leading indicator based on where units are currently, where they are going, and where rates and prices are going. And I published that at thememo.net. And then I also have created an index series that I call the F series. It's essentially, I just index equity markets, housing, construction data to the first day that federal funds effective rate began to rise. So it is from trough to trough of rates, where 100 equals the beginning. And so we get periods of growth and contraction. And then I compare the current market timing to where it was in the past.
Absolutely awesome. And thank you again for joining us. This is an old friend. He and I have been talking for years now. We've been discussing all of this, and we're looking at it with utter amazement, folks. And before we close the show out tonight, I just want to bring some news updates because I know geopolitics is making everybody's eyes bleed, as well as the American political situation, because, well, both parties suck. But we've had an escalation in the war tonight. There are reports that Yanbu on the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia has come under attack. The Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia has come under attack. And just recently, probably the Saudi Arabians have started attacks on the Bandar Abbas against the Houthis. So this war is expanding fast. Some tankers are reportedly on fire on the Omani route coming through, where they hit a minefield that the Iranians laid. Apparently, they were able to sneak out, lay the mines down. We'll get more information as the weekend progresses. But with this escalation, it will be important for everyone to pay attention. X is clearly your best source because the American media is not going to tell you. The foreign media is going to just mask it. They're going to be covering the World Cup. Pay attention. It's about to get interesting, and we're going to have some guests in the weeks ahead to discuss this. Watch oil on the Sunday Night Open. For MacroEdge, this is John Galt. Good night now.